All right, welcome everyone to the last of these Pygame SpongeBob tutorials. Um, in our last session here, just to kind of remind you of where we were at, let's run this code. Where's the Pygame window? There it is. We had this last time. We finally got some collisions working. So we had the starfish was actually bouncing now, and we had the terminal kind of printing out every time there was a collision. So we had a couple of issues. The pineapple, for example, is registering like 20 collisions just by passing through once, which is not what we want. And we also had this kind of bug where if we were moving as the starfish kind of hit us, because the starfish is meant to change directions, but if we were moving, then we could pretty easily kind of create an obvious bug there with the starfish. So we need to kind of get rid of those. We're also going to give this game a little bit of a title, so we're going to try to get some words to show up at the top of the screen here. If you were ever wanted to make like a, say, a role-playing game in Pygame, there's definitely a lot of text in those. So it's good to know how to do some text as well. So let's maybe start with the text. So I'm going to close this out here. Whoops, I ran that too many times by accident. Okay, so we're going to start by finding a font that we like, okay? So remember on the left side here, we have all of the different folders that are, or all the different files that we have access to without having to do any complicated like finding where they are on our hard drive. So we have like remember we had our background, we had our SpongeBob and the pineapple and the pineapple and the starfish. We're going to get a font file to go with that. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is Google Fonts is probably the best way to get some fonts. So I have this browser open here. I've Google searched Google Fonts, and I'm going to look for a font that kind of fits the SpongeBob feel. Okay. I've already kind of found one that I like, but I'll kind of show you how I was able to find that. So when you go to Google Fonts, it starts with this, I think, sidebar closed. And you can kind of search for a particular font if you know what font you're looking for. But that can be a little bit difficult if you're looking for something specific and kind of cartoony, which is what I'm looking for here. So I'm going to open up this filters sidebar. And I'm actually just looking down here. I'm looking for things like, so this feeling filter is pretty good because you can kind of see some different styles here. And also appearance is good. There's things like serif or sans serif, which is kind of like, are there decorative bits to the end? There's 12 more here, but I went for wacky. If I were to think about SpongeBob SquarePants, wacky kind of fits the bill. So I changed my filter to wacky, and then I just scrolled down and found one that I thought worked pretty well. So I think I went for one. It was called, searching here, I ended up finding one called Peralta, I think. There it is. So this one looked like that kind of fit the SpongeBob vibe for me. You can agree or disagree, but this is the one I'm going to use. So if you'd like to pause the video at this point and find your own font, feel free to do that. And then when you get started, you can follow the instructions to download the font because we need to get that into our computer in the same place as those other images. So feel free to pause now and search. And if you are, once you unpause, then I'll go through. So once we click on this font here, then you're looking for the big Get Font button in the top right. So I have a kind of an old one actually sticking around, so I'm just going to hit the trash can on that other one. Peralta is the one I want, so you should see here where it says download all, that there's just one in brackets. So I'm going to click download all, and that is going to download a zip file to the computer. So what I want to do here is I'm just actually immediately going to open up VS Code here, because one of the easiest ways to get this over there is to, I'm going to shrink this window a bit. From that download, you can go and drag it right to the sidebar. So I'm going to do that. So this is currently zipped, so I do need to unzip that. So you need to go into your File Explorer. I'm just going to go to my Google Drive, slightly off the screen here. I'm just going to take a second to navigate to that folder because I do need to unzip it. Okay, so my folder window's right here, and there's the Peralta.zip. So you can either go to the side here and click Extract All in the toolbar at the top, or if you right-click it, there's also an option to extract it all here. So I'm just going to extract that. It brings up this dialog box, show the extracted files when it's completed. I'm just going to click No because I'm already in the right spot here. So there's the folder. And this is the file, the TTF file. So I actually want to, I'm going to press cut, because I don't actually want it in this folder. I just want it kind of outside here, and then I'll paste it here. So I want it just kind of out in the open. I don't want it in a folder. So now I'm just going to delete the Peralta folder and the Peralta zip folder. So I just have this .ttf file sitting there in my file folder. So, and now we can see that it's Peralta regular.ttf sitting right there. So once that is there, now I can return to my code. So in order to get a font in there, we need to create a surface, just like how we created surfaces for the other images. So I'm just going to go into the section where I made all my surfaces. So here we have image files. So I'm just going to go right under here, and I'm just going to say text surfaces. So we're going to follow a similar idea here where we create a rectangle. So the first thing we're going to say is we need to bring in our font. So I'm going to have a variable called myFont. MyFont is going to be equal to, or let's not do the, we'll just say myFont this way. MyFont is equal to, so this is going to be a Pygame thing. So it's Pygame. So inside of Pygame, there's a font section, and then there's a font function. So this might seem really weird. That's pygame.font. Absolutely, that looks weird. But we didn't organize the Pygame library, but that's just the way it is. So this second one is a function, so it takes in an input. And what I'm going to do is grab this Peralta regular.ttf. So if you're worried about the spelling, I'm just going to right-click here and say copy relative path is the one I want. Since it's in the same folder, it's just going to copy the file name. Now, inside of the either single quotes or double quotes, I'll use double quotes here. No, I use single quotes up above. So I'll use the single quotes, and I'm just going to paste in. You just want it to be spelt exactly correctly. So Peralta regular.ttf, and then we do a comma. And then we give it a default font size. By default, I think the size is 20. I'm going to make this a little bigger. Let's say 30 is the default font size. Okay, so that loads in the font. It loads in the font just like the same way where this background line here loaded in the background image. So this loads in our font file. Now we actually need to choose some text to get to the screen. Okay, so we're going to have here, we're going to say, let's call this title. The title... Yeah, I don't think title is going to cause a problem. Yeah, so we'll say the variable is called title, and it's going to be equal to my font. So our font variable, and then there's going to be a render method. So now that it's loaded in as a Pygame font, now we can render some text to the screen. So it takes in some inputs. So first is going to be the actual title. So I'm going to call this SpongeBob game. And it takes in some optional arguments. It takes in an anti-aliasing, which is kind of a smoothing idea. So if you want it to look really pixelated, make it false. If you want it to be kind of rounded, you're not going for a pixelated look, then make it true. Okay, so for now, I'm going to say, let's make it false. I'll say false, so it's going to look pixelated, and then it's going to look for a color value next. I just want this to be white, so I'm going to pass it in 255, 255, 255. So that's all in a set of brackets because we're giving it an RGB code, similar to like what we did with the Arduino, where we had the RGB lights and they had 3 different values for red, green, and then blue. So this creates it. And we're also going to put a rectangle on this one, again, because positioning with a rectangle is just easier. So we're going to say title, and then we'll call this title rectangle is equal to title. We're going to follow the exact same kind of structure here when we made a starfish rectangle. So it's the original fonts of title, then dot get rect. Get rect. And then we want to position it. So I want to position it based off of its, if I kind of come back here, if we remember these different options, I want the middle of the top to be right at the top of the screen. So I'm going to reference this mid-top positioning for the rectangle. I'm going to say that the mid-top should be equal to, I want it to be the screen width, but exactly half. And I want its y-coordinate to be right at the top, so right at 0. So I'm going to place that right at the top. So that creates, so to kind of summarize here, we first had to load in the font. There is a default font. We'll look at maybe just like removing these inputs at the beginning. Then we look at actually making the words. Then we position it using the rectangle. So we're missing one thing here, and that's because every time we made an image, we did need to have a blit to the screen. So I'm going to put this in. So remember, the order that you blit things in kind of defines the layers. So the question is, do I want SpongeBob to be able to go over the text, or do I want it to go under the text? I think I want it to be able to go under the text, actually. So I'm going to do a screen blit, screen.blit, and the surface is the title, and now it's title rectangle. So let's just check on the sizing here. We'll run this. And now we've got SpongeBob game showing up right at the top. And since it was blit last, we can go underneath. So that's actually pretty, it's really light colored at the top. So actually don't like that white. I'm going to change it to something closer to black. I'm going to do something like not quite exactly black, but if I make these all lower, maybe 50s. In terms of the size, 30 seemed okay. Let's make it a little bigger. Let's make it 35. And let's run that. So now we've got SpongeBob. So now you can see that pixely bit a bit more. It doesn't look great, but this is what the anti-aliasing will do. So I'm going to go ahead now and turn that to true. So where was it? It was this false. This was the anti-aliasing. So I'm going to change it to capital T true, and that will smooth it out. So now when we go here, that fits a bit better. Even though this is cartoony, it's not like pixelated cartoony, so this just looks better. By default, if you were concerned, I would say just turn anti-aliasing on, unless the only reason to turn it off is if you're going for a very specific look. So that second one I would just pretty much always say is true. So now we got a title, and we've got some collisions that are working with some bugs in it. Okay, so before I move on, I'm just gonna experiment because there is a default font. So I'm going to just delete where I define the font. If I just say it's equal to this font, I believe Pygame has some default values here. So let's just see. So it didn't wreck anything, but you can see that the size is pretty small. So the default is much smaller than 35. It's also not really cartoony. I'm not sure what font that is, but it looks like something like maybe Arial font or something that is a regular default font. But it can work. You can just declare a font. If you don't give it any file name or anything, it'll just choose its regular font. But I definitely like it better with the one we had in there. So that's what we're going to have in. So we got our SpongeBob game. Now we're going to look at fixing these collisions. Okay. So the logic, let's talk about how we would maybe want to fix this. So if we're registering collisions, if you think about a game where you take damage, sometimes if your characters, let's say their character's always solid, as you walk around the screen, but then you get hit by something, usually there's a period where your character's maybe like flashing or maybe like glowing red, like you just took some damage. And you sometimes get a cooldown window where you can't take any new damage if you just took some. So that gives you kind of maybe time to run away to get somewhere safe before you are ready for another collision. So that's what we're going to code in. We're going to code in this kind of timer that kind of counts down and gives us a little cooldown period. So let's get into the code here. So this is something that is going to require the game loop. So we are going to have one variable first, and it's going to be, because it's going to be kind of tied to this clock here. So we're going to say here that we're going to define a variable called collide timeout, and let's call it and let's make another variable called collide timeout max. So what's the maximum amount of time that we want to wait before we can get hit again? So remember, because it's been a little while since we've seen this, how this clock has been working. Down at the bottom of the code, we set it to 60. So, and this worked out to be 60 frames per second. So this loop, this kind of while loop, was slowed down to go at 60 frames per second. So that means every time, 60 is going to be equal to 1 second. So if we want, for example, our collide timeout max, if we want 3 seconds of grace before we can get hit again, we'd want to set the maximum to 180, because that's 60 times 3. So you can choose this to make something different, but I'm going to say about 2 seconds is probably enough. So I'm going to say that the max is 120. And I'm going to start, because this collide timeout, this is going to be a timer that's going to count up. Okay. And how this is going to work is that if the timeout is at its maximum, 120 already, then that means you're ready to be hit. Once we get hit, we're going to start the collide timer at 0, and it's going to count up. Once it gets to 120, then it's available for hit again. But as it's counting, if it's ever less than 120, you're still kind of in your flashing period or your glowing red. You're still kind of not able to be hit. So for right now, I'm just going to set this equal to... I'm just going to set it equal to the collide timeout max. So it's going to be at 120 when you start the game, because you're ready for a collision right when you begin the game. Okay, so those are the variables we're going to be using here. Now we're going to get into the game loop at the bottom. Maybe I'll just write one comment here before we'll just say that the collide timeout will count from 0 to collide timeout max when hit, while counting no extra damage. We'll just say that. Okay, so let's just fix that typo. All right, so when we get to let's do a couple of things here. So now we're down to the while loop. We're in the collision section here. So currently we just had the print statements showing up here. So one thing that I'm going to need to do is set collide timeout equal to 0. So this is like you just got hit, so now the timeout is setting, and it will start to count up towards 120 after that. So we want that line every time there is a collision. So collide timeout is going to be set equal to 0. Now we need a way to count this thing up. Okay, so what we're going to have here is just let's make a section here for collision timer. So if we want those 2 seconds, so we don't want it to ever count past 120, but if it's still counting, we want it to increase by 1. So we write an if condition that says if the collide timeout, if it's less than collide timeout max, then we want to increase it by 1. Collide timeout equals collide timeout plus 1. Okay, so we are depending on that clock timer here because this is running 60 times a second. So I am trusting that by just adding 1 each time, 120 is going to be 2 full seconds. So if it is still less than 120, and we can change that value up at the top if we wanted to, then we just kind of increase it by 1. And let's just see that happening. So we'll print the collide timeout. This will just be useful to see in the terminal down below. So what's happening here is that when collide timeout is at its maximum, 120, we are ready to be hit. But anytime we get hit by the pineapple or the starfish, collide timeout gets set to 0. And while it's counting, we can't. Oh, actually, we still can. We need to change this. So if SpongeBob Rect is colliding with Pineapple Rect, we need to add a condition here. We need to say also that the collide timeout value is still less than 120 or equal to 120. So we'll say and. So we're going to make two things need to be true. The rectangles need to be collided, and the collide timeout needs to be at its maximum. And collide timeout is equal, let's say double equals collide timeout max. So if it's at 120 and the things have collided, then they will register this collision. Okay, so I think this will work. Let's run this and see if we run into any problems. Okay, so the starfish is a good one to check with. So we can see that okay, so the pineapple is, let's hide SpongeBob in the corner here. Okay, so we're not getting collisions with the starfish. Once we hit the starfish, we can see the timer increase to 120. Let's count for 2 seconds. So we'll say 1,000, 2, 1,000. Pretty close, I think. 1,000, 2, 1,000. It's probably my counting. It is 2 seconds, and you can see that we can no longer trap the starfish. And it passes through us for those 2 seconds. So that is keeping that from happening. So if you had hit points coded into your game here, you do have that grace period. And let's see the pineapple. So the pineapple is only, you can see that pineapple, the hit message is only showing up the one time. So that timeout now makes the game a little bit more functional. We fixed that bug with having too many collisions. And then we also have the title for the game. So at this point, now you've got enough structure and code examples that you can now turn this into your own game. So by default, I want you to, look at the instructions, but the default game is just to add a couple more objects. So find a couple of more PNGs like the starfish and the pineapple. You can search for PNGs that already have backgrounds cleared. If you find an image you really like but has a white background, you can try and there's lots of online tools that will help you clear the backgrounds. They'll do a good enough job for this. Once you have it, you'll want to make sure that it's small enough. Like, remember, I've made these all like 50 pixels wide. If they're too big, they'll be huge on the game. So you'll need to appropriately size your objects and then just make some other things that SpongeBob is going to collide with. Once you get 2 more things in there, that's kind of the default game, but you can absolutely take this and make more things. You can make other obstacles, you can make hit points, you can make a way to win the game, you could make a maze, you could do all sorts of things just depending on how much time you have and how comfortable you're feeling with these different code blocks and procedures. Okay, but that is going to be it for this video. And this is the last one, so thanks for following along.